Welcome to the very first episode of the Diabetes Nerd podcast. I'm your host, Ginger Vieira. I have lived with type 1 diabetes for, I don't know, about 25 years or since 1999, depending on what year you're listening to this podcast, In 5 years, it'll be 30 years, right? So, anyway, today, my guest, without further ado, I must tell you, is Bobby Jean Garceau, also known as BJ.
Hi there, and well, so that's a long time with diabetes. I'm glad you brought up the 30th year. This last week actually, I was getting discharged from the pediatric unit in 1995. So this is my
Oh,
30th. I had my 30th anniversary last month.
okay. All right. So you got 30 years under your belt. Yeah. Okay.
Again, it's a competition.
Yeah.
It's one of those
Yeah.
things. I
No.
feel, and I know we're going to be talking about different things, but yeah, every diabetic I meet, which I love meeting type 1 diabetics. Like, I love you. I met you at an adult type 1 diabetes camp, and it was love at first jump rope. Like, it was. But I feel as though every time I meet a diabetic, they're always like, oh, I've only had it 9 years. That's nothing
Right.
compared to your 30 years. I just want to make
That
it very
doesn't
clear.
matter. Yeah.
It goes by fast, such
Mm.
as life. And it's not a competition. If you're newly diagnosed, if you're, as people will call me, a veteran of the diabetes
Right.
world, um, every day is a thing with diabetes. So don't
Yeah.
ever make it a competition on who has
Yeah.
more years.
Yeah.
Every day is a type 1.
I got some comments this week on a YouTube video from a few different people, and it was basically the same sentiment. One was like, I've lived with type 1 for 43 years and I'm still learning. I've lived with type 1 for 30 years and I never knew this. And my response is like, yeah, I'm still learning too.
Every day.
Yeah, it doesn't
Every
matter.
day.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, today my blood sugar did something at noon that it usually does around 8:30 a.m. because I don't eat breakfast. It just like cuts a corner and goes sky high, right? And I've been
Yeah.
waiting for it to happen all day. But, it's like, yeah. So, anyway, before we get into how awesome BJ is, I want everybody to know this is the
I pay
first
her for these things.
episode. Yeah, this is the first episode, which is why BJ and I are so pumped up and a little hyper. And we've been talking about this for a while. Very funny.
Get it?
No pun intended. Yes.
Unintended.
No pun intended. No, that was an accident because I'm not pumped up. I'm a frizz it up.
I know, and I
But
want to talk about that in the future. I want to have a discussion about
okay.
your life, and
Oh,
we'll
I'm
talk about
sure.
that.
I mean, we're gonna have a lot of conversations, BJ. We can't fit it all in this one
I
episode.
know. I was actually, before we get to it, I was explaining our relationship. I'm like, Ginger is the good diabetic, and I'm the rebel diabetic.
That's
When
terrible. That's not true.
you're the girl I would cheat off in class. Like
What's that?
and I love that about our friendship as diabetics. Like
That's so
you have
I
a,
my blood sugar was 250 when I woke up this morning.
so
There's I
it's okay.
well, I just want to put it out there. I'm no perfect diabetic,
Yeah,
but
it's fine.
cheat off
But
in
I'm
class.
just saying, you're a good girl. You're a good girl.
I don't know. People would argue. But on that note, I want to tell you and the audience that I'm really not going to edit this. So if you say something you don't mean, that's kind of your own problem. It would have to be really terrible for me to take the time after this and go in and find that sentence and cut it out. So this is high quality, low production, high quality conversation with 0% editing. How about that?
I love
Okay.
that. Those are the best
Yeah.
podcasts, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is legit. And I want to tell the listeners that another reason why I am really grateful to have you as the first guest. Oh, hello, puppy.
Yes.
And I think of you as a co-host, to be honest. Is you've been telling me to do this for a while. You've been
Yeah.
asking me to do this for a while. I like to let ideas simmer a little bit, so I was simmering. But I was recently in Maine, speaking at an event that you help manage for people in Maine with diabetes. And when I'm on stage and I know that BJ is in the audience, I feel like my best self. I feel like I'm really just trying to entertain BJ. And if BJ's entertained, I'm giving my best performance. And I realized that during that event, I don't think I necessarily, well,
I love it.
not, yeah, it was, and so I think the next time I'm speaking somewhere, and you're not going to be there, I'm going to pretend you're in the audience. I'm going to channel that same energy.
Well, I just want people to be their best selves.
Well,
Like, you
you
know what I
bring
mean?
that out of me.
I just have admired you through the years, and I just love your content, and I love you've helped me grow as a diabetic. Like you said, even though having it for 30 years, I just remember the conversations we had at camp. We went hiking and we talked about different things, and you helped
Yeah,
me become a better athlete and person with some,
that's
and
crazy.
be,
You're a
well,
mega
and feel
athlete.
okay with some of the things I was doing. Because
Mm.
I was in fight camps when we, I was, I had just gotten done, I think, a fight to afford my insulin pump, which will be another story.
Wow.
And I went out to Colorado and I was just like cutting weight and doing these things. And when I read your book and had discussions, and you were like, it's okay to fast because I grew up in 95 where you ate carbohydrates before
Mm.
working out. And I still have
Right.
diabetics right now who are struggling with that. And I
Yeah.
just take that, even if that was like the little, that, and that made a huge difference in my physical performance. So,
Mm.
anyways, I just wanted to say, and I've respected you for that. So I'm always cheering for you.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to be in the crowd. And you did a fantastic job, I have to say.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
let's give everybody a little background on you. As you know, I have prepared zero for this zero production effort, high quality conversation. So I have no bio script to read about you. So can you tell them first of all when you were diagnosed, and today you are like a badass ninja, but the story that we're going to share today is that like as having been, I was a personal trainer about 20 years ago and a competitive athlete, and I know that before that I was someone who really struggled with my fitness and my health, and exercise was kind of not foreign to me. I dabbled in it as a high schooler, right, but I was never an athlete in high school and my first few years of college. And I know that people tend to assume that someone who is fit and diligent in their fitness activities, right, has always been that way. And I know I could make the same assumption. I assume that about you, right?
Oh,
So when I
yeah.
heard this story that you have shared in a few places, it
Yeah.
was like, whoa. And I shared it with three people in my life who know you because I
Yeah.
knew it would shock them too. So tell
Oh,
me a
yeah.
little bit about BJ before we get into this big story.
Okay. So we'll just start. A lot of people know me now as an MMA fighter or retired MMA fighter. I
Or
ran
just
a
a general badass, but yes.
Yeah, yeah, and like, and I preach about like the plant-based diet, which is going to be another
Mm-hmm.
however, I'm from a really small town in Greenbush, and Greenbush, Maine, that's the real name, and it's just so funny to me. And I grew up with hunters and some just interesting, very different lifestyle than I live now.
Oh.
Um, and I used to smoke and drink and party. And we'll get into that stuff later on. I was like a bouncer at a nightclub. I
Oh,
would mingle with some unhealthy people.
okay.
Um, and I had a pretty bad substance abuse problem with that, with the point where I didn't really tell people about diabetes because people
Oh,
assumed it was like
okay.
a type 2 thing.
Yep.
Um, and it was just one of those things that, yeah, so it was interesting. I was a different person, meaning that like I was out eating ribs and drinking beer and smoking
Oh,
cigarettes. I used to be about 40 pounds heavier,
okay.
um, and things like that. And that was the lifestyle I grew up around, and that was the people I grew up around.
Right.
And that was, and this is something we're gonna, I hope, discuss later too, is community. My community was not a healthy community, and they influenced bad choices.
Mm, right.
And we're going to get to the story on how all of that changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I wasn't put, and I tell people this all the time. I'm really happy when people Google me today than if they were to Google me probably about 15
Mm,
years ago.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right.
And it
So,
shows around.
so take me back 15 years ago. What would I have found if I were to find Bobby Jean Garceau? I
So when
love
I'm
saying your real
it's
name.
okay.
I'm
I love it
sorry.
when you
It's
come,
just
but
adorable, and it's just like it's the kind of name that you
yeah,
thought
well, this
maybe
is
only exists in movies, but you're a real person with the name Bobby Jean.
well, well, I was actually named after both of my parents.
Oh,
My dad is Robert Bobby. They called him Bobby, and my
ah,
mom is Bonnie Jean. So they just put Bobby in. and they named me after them. So
That's adorable.
I know, right out in Greenbush,
Yeah,
Maine.
good old green bush.
Yeah, you would never guess that, man. So 15 years ago. So I'm just gonna rewind a little bit. So
Yeah.
I about before I was working at a hospital 15 years ago, but fast forward, rewind to 2 years before that.
Okay.
I was working as a substance abuse counselor.
Oh,
I was helping opioid addicts as well as working with I think it's DUIs in every other
yep.
state, but they're OUIs in Maine, so operating under the influence.
Oh,
I was
okay.
a deep counselor and a substance abuse counselor. However, I was also abusing substances
While you were a substance abuse
while I was
counselor.
a substance abuse counselor, and I also
Wow.
was a drinker with my coworkers because a lot of people who work in mental health, especially in Maine, not all of them, but we would
Yeah.
go out for after drinks after work, things like that.
Mm.
So I was working in this position. I went out and I was drinking. My blood sugar dropped. And because I thought of my status, because I was this counselor and a deep, and I knew, and I thought that I was okay to drive to go get a snack.
Mm.
And I did it because I was at a bar. It was super busy. I had been drinking, and for some reason, made a decision to get behind the wheel, which I regret.
Mm.
Got behind the wheel, was driving to go find glucose, and of course, my blood sugar was super low. I was on manual injections. Didn't even know things like insulin pumps were an option because, again, growing up in northern Maine, you know.
Yeah.
Anywho, so I went driving to get glucose. I didn't put my high beams down in time, got pulled over. And I rolled down the window and I said, please help me, please help me. My blood sugar is getting low. And I got out of the car and I fell out. And I had been drinking. Again, I'm not saying I didn't. It turns out my glucose levels were in the 30. I didn't carry a meter on me. I just didn't
Mm.
care. All
Oh,
I did was have a vial of insulin and I
oh.
would just take it. And like I was
Yeah.
not the diabetic I was today. I
Yeah.
just, you know,
Yeah.
anywho, fell out of the car. The cops were like, ma'am. And I couldn't walk. I was just like, please help me. I'm diabetic. And they actually put me in the jail instead until I almost passed out.
They didn't believe you? You're telling
No,
them clear as
they just
day?
drunk. And they found cannabis on me, and
Yeah.
cannabis was illegal at the time.
Yeah.
And I was prescribed Ritalin for my ADHD.
But they didn't give you any juice or glucose or
They
anything.
gave me a little bit, but I don't know if I don't know what happened, but it might have been the alcohol I was drinking, but I could not get my
Mm.
blood sugar up.
Yeah,
So,
it would have taken more. Okay.
yeah. And then I ended up, I believe, passing out in the jail.
Oh.
And they did a finger prick on me and it was low. And then they called an ambulance and I went to the ED and ended up losing my career over substance abuse. Yeah.
Okay.
And uncontrolled diabetes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that was a little bit, and I was, like I said, heavier. I was eating out, eating like this horrible food.
Okay.
And so, anywho, so then we
Okay.
were,
So thank you for sharing that because
yeah,
that
yeah,
is one a really hard thing to share,
of
and
course.
also a really important kind of pre-story to kind of the theme of today's conversation. But yeah, I mean,
And
that's
it's one
like,
of those things, and and I know there's a lot of people who are on whether they're just manual injections or they're type twos and just we don't realize the effect alcohol has,
yeah,
especially if we're not monitoring and this is where I feel personally CGMs and things like that are so important, especially if you are socializing, we can kind of get a better aspect of
yeah,
it. But yeah, so that kind of was that. So I
yeah.
ended up becoming unemployed. I cashed in my retirement
Mm.
and I lived about a year just in the backwoods. Again, moved back out to the backwoods, gained probably I was about 160 pounds.
Okay.
Right
And for
now,
anyone listening, watching, BJ is very short and petite, but a fireball of mighty power for sure.
yeah. So I'm 5'1", and I was about
You're
100.
shorter than me. You're shorter than me. I'm 5'2".
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. I'm
You're a
tall.
giant to me.
Yeah.
But so I gained a lot of weight. I just lived off unemployment and drank, and I just
Wow.
drank, and I didn't have a driver's license. And then I realized my unemployment benefits were good, and I didn't have health insurance. So I was like counting my vials and doing that stuff, and I just fell into a deep depression. So then I was drinking with a friend who worked in surgical at a hospital. Got a job doing sterile processing, which is what I do
Yeah.
now, but we'll
Yep.
talk about that later. But I work full time. And it was great and it was wonderful. But again, I didn't have a driver's license. And this will take us to the story when you're
Yeah.
ready.
Okay. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, and I was working, I used to work at a bar, um, and at a Mexican bar, and I used to drink and things like that. And I was also a cigarette smoker. Like, I used to smoke, because I drank a lot. So would smoke
Yeah.
cigarettes, and I thought it was cool.
Part of the lifestyle.
Yeah. And then, so I worked the second shift at the hospital, and I wasn't driving, so I would walk to my apartment, which
Right.
is in a questionable neighborhood, if you
Okay.
will.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was probably about 4 weeks prior to that, I met a girl that would soon become my wife. Yeah,
Amazing.
she's great, and
Laura. Yep.
yeah, she's been my biggest support and one of the main reasons I'm where I'm at today. So, anyways, I left the hospital. I was walking down a questionable street, and I was like, I'm gonna go see if my girlfriend's home. I would like to see, Mara. And she was like, yeah, come over. She was just hanging out, playing Mario Kart. And I was heavy. I was on manual injection, so like I always carried a bag with me, like a messenger bag, whenever I would walk because I just had always thought I was tough. Like, like anyway, so I was just walking. I had a headphone in and walking down the street. I was going to go see my girlfriend, and I crossed this little wooden bridge, which was just a shortcut. And we do have what I would just like to say less fortunate population. We have people who find comfort living on the streets and
Okay.
things like that in particular parts of our neighborhood.
Okay.
And there's a county jail that was probably about 500 yards to the left.
Okay.
So either way, I was walking, and again, being from the backwoods of Greenbush, I heard a crack in the woods. And again, I was smoking a cigarette, overweight. I had my insulin vials in my messenger bag, and who knows, I was probably smoking weed on the walk home. Who knows?
And
Either
had you
way.
just been drinking? So you also had a
I
little alcohol?
I did not drink. I was going
Oh,
there.
okay.
Me and Mara were
Sure.
going to meet up and then go out after.
Okay.
So I was walking, and I'm just going to make a little side comment. So anyway, no, I'll make it after this. So I was walking and I heard a crackle in the woods, and I was like, oh my god, it's probably a critter because I'm from the backwoods of Maine, and like we have raccoons and just critters. We have
Cute
critters.
little critter.
A good old little critter. And I put my flashlight on my phone. You know how we have that. And it wasn't the best flashlight. And I put the flashlight in front of me like this, and I saw a pair of boots. And just me, I'm social. I'm like, oh, okay, there's, whatever. If I have like food or money, maybe I can help this person out. Take the flashlight, and I just moved it up and saw a body, and I kept going, and there was I say gentleman, but there was a man there with a gun pointed at my head.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, for me personally, even though I was overweight and like, I was, you think you're going to act tough in certain situations, right? Until that situation actually happens. And like I am a different person today. I don't
Yeah.
know how I reacted. So anyways, I put the flashlight up on this person. They had a rifle, like almost like a hunting rifle, and they just pointed at me. They didn't blink. They didn't say anything, and I just held onto my bag because I knew my insulin was in there. I knew this guy had a gun, which would win in any situation, and I just was not like this brave person that
Yeah.
I am today.
Right.
I actually
You were
reacted to
scared
words
shitless. Yeah.
yeah, and the only words I could mutter out of my mouth were like, "Fuck." Because and this is going to be because like I couldn't speak, like I was so shocked that I didn't yell for help. I didn't, which
Panic.
it might have
Yeah.
been a blessing because I don't know if yelling would have scared a reaction or things
Right.
like that. But and it was
Right.
dark, and then I had my flashlight, and I just was didn't know what to do, so I just stood there for a minute, and then I just backed up, and I tried running away, but I was so overweight and smoker that I literally probably got 100 yards and I was out of breath. I wasn't even to my girlfriend's apartment yet. And I was just like, oh my God. So I was waiting for them to either grab me steal my bag, which would have been my insulin. And of
Yep.
course, like we all know how insurance is and
Yeah.
things like that. And I'm like, and I was, so, and my glucose meter and things like that were in my bag. And, but the biggest, they never chased me. They never did a thing. And
Okay.
come to find out, there was a population that lived down there. So there was reason to believe he was kind of standing guard.
Oh,
At least that's what I said.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then I ended up going to my girlfriend's apartment just in shock, and I was out of breath. I could barely breathe, and it was just a mess. And I just took one look at her, and I was like, I need to make some changes. I need to make some
Mm.
changes immediately. Like I couldn't even, I wouldn't have been able to protect myself.
You
And when
just
I,
knew in that moment that quickly? Like, because some people might have just been still overwhelmed by the panic and the shock of the moment.
yeah, I just knew, I knew I probably wouldn't have been able to do a thing. Like
Yeah.
I was so tired from trying to run away.
Yeah. Right.
It was,
Let alone defend yourself. You couldn't even move your body
no,
well.
no.
Mm.
And being the size I was, which for me, I just realized that, like, I didn't realize until I became fit, I didn't realize how difficult it is to do daily activities. Like, I forgot that because I was either drinking or doing things like that. Like, and so,
Yeah.
anyways, that was a huge eye opener for me because I have never been in that situation where I've had someone point a gun at me and then just stand there.
Yeah.
And now I'll never forget it.
So, what
Yeah.
did you do the very next day?
I talked to my wife. She wanted me to make a report and things like that. The jail was right down there. I walked into the jail and I just stood there and I just ended up walking out. And I was like, I was like, I need to change myself about this. I'm like, and so I had actually coworkers pick me up. I would get rides home.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So
I
you stopped
noticed,
walking.
yeah. And then I
Yeah.
noticed too, just when I started working at the hospital, I hadn't seen an endocrinologist in probably about 10 years. So I was getting insulin through my PCP. Like that's
Yeah.
again how much I did not care
Yeah.
about my diabetes. And they actually offer free endocrinologist diabetes services. And I met my wife, and I was just like, I have to make some changes. And I ended up, my endocrinologist who I have now, I saw her because I started getting some neurological, like where I just was losing a little bit of feeling in my fingertips, like my digits and things like that.
Oh,
And then I was like, I hope this isn't a sign for like, future
yeah.
complications. I'm like, I want to stop it before it could get any worse. Went and saw my endocrinologist, and I get it for free because I work at the hospital. So I
Oh,
was like, yay, because
nice.
we all know how
Yeah.
expensive
Amazing.
medical. Told her about what happened, and I also have a hard time feeling my lows,
Mm,
uh,
okay.
and that brought
Still
great
today?
pleasure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and anyway, so she hooked me up with the Medtronic pump like 10 years ago. I got on a CGM after that scare because I was just like, I need to
Like
make
this is
changes.
within weeks or days of
It was probably
having the
within 3
gun?
weeks. I made a change.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
called my
Wow.
PCP because obviously I was struggling mental health wise. I
Yeah.
was very concerned about how out of breath I was. Like I still can't
Mm-hmm.
get over that. And it was probably either from high glucose because I didn't realize at the time either. I think it may have been when I read your book. You talked about a certain level that we're not supposed to work out at.
When you're exercising over 250, you're like, it's just so
Yeah.
much stress. Yeah.
Right. And
And
like anyway.
ketones. And,
Right. And I just realized I needed to get that under control. And since I've had my glucose under control, I've had my asthma under control. That which I
interesting.
didn't realize. Anywho,
Mm.
so went to the doctors and I had a A1C of I think 10 something.
Mm, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because I overate and
You were
then like
not
I would get the
feeling well.
roller coaster, but then I
Yeah.
would drink. Anyway,
And that also means that you were kind of in like mild ketosis all the time, which is definitely you were not
I
feeling
was very
great.
bloated. Like there was a lot of nachos and tequila And like, it was good. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm always gonna, when I look back on
Nachos
those,
and tequila are
it was
some of my
delicious.
favorite things. Yes.
Me too, but I was like an overindulger. I'm like more
Yes. There's no
like a picture for
balance.
myself. Let's go.
Right.
Um,
It's a
and
great
so
idea.
I know, and like I'm gonna reflect on these times, and they were good times, except for the walk home where there was a gun, and
Yeah.
and so going with that, met my endocrinologist. My wife went with me, and she was actually the first family member to go with me, other than my
Oh,
mother when I was first diagnosed at 12.
oh.
My so yeah, so that
Yeah.
was a
You
big
had
step
some
for me.
support. Yeah.
Yeah, and and I didn't realize how much I needed support, and then allowing her to help me has allowed me to help myself.
You let somebody help you?
I It's very rare, very rare.
That's hard for most of us. Congratulations.
It's a
Let
selfish
somebody
disease.
support you. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
diabetes is selfish. It's ours. Like we're the only one. Like when we're like even if you were going low right now, I could identify with you probably better than a non-diabetic. But when
Yeah.
we're having these experiences as diabetics, it's ours.
Yeah,
Like
right. And
so
it's very, it's like, like right now, my bestie, Tara, is getting my diabetes data because in order to try to set up, I'm trying to connect a glucose, right, to my Libre.
yeah.
And in order to do that, I need to be sharing my data with someone. And so I'm sharing it with Tara. And I've done this once before, but within like one day, I was like, nope, taking it back. And because she was commenting, and she's really good, she knows what not to say, but she was like commenting in a teasing way.
Yeah.
And now she's getting the data. Yeah. And she's not saying a word because she knows.
Well, where are you at right now?
Well, I was rising. Let's see. I'm at 140 now.
140. Yeah.
Yep.
Good to see.
89. Look at that beauty.
We'll take it. A
Yeah.
little drop post
Yeah.
workout.
So can you tell me so you started using diabetes tech, started paying attention to your blood sugars in a way you never had.
And it's
Can you,
crazy because I
yeah.
fast raced all through middle school and high school,
Oh, yeah.
and I just freestyled it. I'd give myself a
Right.
little bit of insulin, or I would like, and I remember I
Well,
used
back
to.
then we didn't have a choice. I mean,
Right.
like
And I
I
would lose
remember having diabetes in high school, but and I remember like I went on like 5 mile runs regularly in high school. I would just trot by myself, right? And and again, that's I was not an athlete and I was overweight. I didn't have that whole thing figured out, but I don't remember really like I didn't have my glucose meter with me. Back then
never.
you just made sure you weren't going to go low. And I don't
That
think
was
I was
it.
250, right? But you just made sure you weren't going to go low and you couldn't hang out at 89 all day because you didn't have a CGM to keep you safe at 89.
Exactly, and it's
Yeah.
crazy because I think about the workouts I did because I remember, we had the food pyramid, and I remember that I would take insulin to feed the carbohydrates, like my
Yeah.
nutritionist and stuff. And I was like, that's the only way I knew diabetes is like, I'm going to plan out 85 grams of carbs first thing in the morning. And like, we never factored like hormones or like exercise or things like that. And I
Right.
just
No, you
remember
couldn't.
how, right, and I would eat all the sugar before like playing field hockey and basketball. And little did I realize, I'm like, I can barely
Yeah.
breathe. Like, it hurts to.
Yeah. You were in ketosis. You were in ketosis a lot if your A1C is at 10.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and again, it's a lot of sugar and drinks, a lot of nachos, a
Yeah.
lot of tequila, a lot of
Yeah.
things like that, and just
Yeah.
guesstimating. But
So, okay, so you started getting diabetes data, but I want to ask you about the even harder things to change are for most people are how you're eating and making exercise a part of your life.
is I started having fun with exercise.
Yep.
Like it
All
was one of
right.
those things, yeah, yeah, and it was one of those things where, and I know this sounds cheesy, but I had just gotten the insulin pump with a CGM. I had decided to, when I wasn't drinking, I wasn't smoking, and so if I wasn't doing that, and then I realized it's very hard to jog or walk or do things if you smoke. My wife was a social smoker. She quit, which made it super easy for me to quit.
Oh, okay.
So again, community and support there.
Yep. Go Mara.
So yeah, so I saw on my CGM how my glucose levels were changing. I had the option to shut insulin off, which when
Mm.
you're on manual, which again you have it down to a T, but for someone like me, I I just
Yeah.
didn't know how to manage it with manual injections and things like that, and plus
Yeah.
the
No
dosing
one had
was
ever taught you. How would you have known? They don't teach that.
yeah. And then so I just started going. I was like, I'm gonna go for a run, and I realized I couldn't go for a run, so I went for a walk. And then
Mm.
I would just like make a really good playlist, go for a walk, and kind of like zone out. And then I was like, I'm bored. I'm gonna go on the elliptical. So then I would just kind of, because I have really bad ADHD.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say it sounds like
yeah.
I know
So
you
I'm
do.
like, I'm gonna go on the elliptical because I want to move my knees and I want to back it up.
Yeah.
And then I realized, and then I was like, okay, cool, wait, that's another thing. And then I realized, I was like, okay, this is fun if I mix it up, and did some research and found out
Mm.
you do like, at least this has worked for me, like 15 minutes of cardio, a little bit of weight resistant. And then I noticed when I did weight resistance and strength training, my speed got better, like because my legs got stronger, and I realized how
Mm.
important strength and training is with diabetes. So anywho, went walking. I remember my first mile was like 15 minutes, and I was like, oh. So then I started making competition. Where I don't know if as a kid, did you ever play the game like, oh, if I don't cross the line or run this fast, something's gonna happen. Like, I don't know if you ever
Is it
played
all
that.
on your own in your own imagination? No, I don't think.
If I don't get there in 30 seconds or less, like my house will blow up for some reason.
I did
No, it's like a
not play
game
that
based on
game.
these kids. Yeah. So anywho, so I went for a walk and then I went for a jog, and I noticed too that my ADHD slowed down when I was
Mm.
doing cardio. So then I lost about 10 pounds, 10, 15 pounds. I still wasn't eating great. I was still drinking a little bit, socializing. And then my wife worked at a coffee shop right next to an MMA gym. And my wife's, she's pretty, I guess. Some people think she's a pretty
She's
girl.
a total babe. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so the fighters would actually go down and hit on her.
Good
And
luck
they
to them.
invited her to go to the MMA gym. And Mara's like, hey, babe, I think I found something for you to do.
Oh, that was her idea initially?
Yeah, she was the one because I never
How
thought about it.
funny.
And I was like, oh, I was like, this is fun. And I was watching a lot of The Walking Dead. And there was something in The Walking Dead where I didn't realize it after getting a gun held up to my head. I don't think I would be prepared for the end of the world
Or the
because
zombie
that was,
apocalypse. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I know this is cheesy, but I was like, and I
Still.
love my wife very much. And and I was going to the gym and and I
Yeah.
actually thought, and here's the funny part though, is I actually thought I was tough just by lifting weights and running around.
Oh,
So my
right,
wife,
right. Yeah. That's not the same as being able
no,
to do something when someone's punching
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I wasn't eating well, but I was drinking more water. Um, and we were kind of going that way, cutting alcohol out.
Well, and
And then,
before you get into nutrition, I just want to point out that something you did in the gym really breaks kind of the societal idea of what it means to like go start exercising. You just played around. You didn't say like, "Oh, I've got to go run 2 miles," or "I need to join a CrossFit," or Orange Theory. Just go in there and play around. And people, having been a personal trainer, I know how scared people are to just go in and see what this stuff is about, the equipment.
and I'm just at a point too, because I was just so fascinated in seeing what exercises did, like how weightlifting affected my glucose levels. Or
Hmm.
it, like, and I was still doing old behaviors like drinking 45 grams of Gatorade, like carbohydrates before a 3 mile run, and my sugar would skyrocket.
Hmm.
Like I would see this on the and this was an
Yeah.
older pump. It wasn't the best pump in the world, but it was a rough draft, and I was like, this is, and it almost became like a science project. Like my body became a science project, and so it was kind of cool. And then I was doing this weight routine, and I had lost about 10 pounds, and then my wife was like, hey, these fighters keep coming down, and you've been watching The Walking Dead, and you kind of want to prep a little bit. And I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. And I walked in, and I was such an asshole because I had been in bar fights, and I was like, that person who watches the UFC, and I'm like, oh, oh, and I'm not like I get humbled very quickly. So I walked into the MMA gym. My wife came with me, but she didn't participate. She doesn't like people being that close to her, as you know.
No, right.
She likes her distance. Um, but I walked in and I did an MMA fitness class, which was just like a hit workout. And it was like, you worked on crunch, like you didn't do any weights, you punched bags. And it was one of those things where I thought I knew how to throw a punch. And I did not.
You
So I
hurt,
did it
you
and
hurt yourself. Yeah.
yeah, and I did that and I signed up for the gym immediately because I was like, this is perfect for my ADHD. I was like, it's a full body workout. And I noticed the more MMA I did, the better I got at running and the more confident I get and
Hmm.
things like that. And then I had to learn how to cut weight because I've had 5 fights and I fought at 3 different weight classes because we were
Yeah.
really careful, but we can talk about that later. But then going to nutrition, my wife actually, I went vegetarian after I got drunk one night and I had rabbits, and I thought they were mad at me for eating meat, and I drunkenly made a anyway. So I went vegetarian. My wife did research because she was having some arthritic pain and things like that, and she found that the plant-based diet helps with inflammation
Hmm.
and it helps with blood flow and it helps with these things. So my wife was like, I'm thinking about making this life change.
Oh, you did
You're
together.
vegetarian. Would you be interested in going plant based? And I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I would love to go plant based. And then it's taken a long time. We've been plant based for about 8 years. I'll have one drink when I go out to eat with friends, just to have a dining experience. And I'll tell you what, I've never felt better since changing my diet to a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of trial and error. Like I would not be here I am today without failing many, many a times.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Experimenting.
I just need a
Experimenting is
gun in my
fine.
head, Ginger. I just need
Yeah.
a gun in my head to make things change.
Yeah.
Like, damn.
Yeah. Whew. All right. Well, that's like phase one of Bobby Jean's diabetes revolution. Yeah. Thank you
I'm
for
glad
taking us
I
through that. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. And like I said, it was a lot, and it took a lot to get here. And I am very active now because I found out what works for my diabetes, such as my diet, such
Mm-hmm.
as my exercise routine.
Yeah.
And plus, who doesn't want to put
And when you say
diabetes in
what
weight?
works, like if anyone's listening who's like, well, I tried this diet and that diet and that diet. That's the point. Is it I'm talking to the listener now instead of you. You did not like put yourself under some kind of strict, rigid thing. You experimented and eased into it and developed something that works for you. And you did vegetarianism before plant-based. And I'm sure if you wanted to, you'd eat a slice of cheese, but you're not forced into being vegan, right? Plant-based.
Don't get
It's
me
your
wrong.
choice. Yeah.
Little M&M candy, like the little Easter candies. Like I know there's milk chocolate in there. If I see one fall on the floor, someone's gonna
Right.
pick it
It's
up, you
not the
know?
end of the world. Right. These are your kind of, they're like your guiding principles. They're not these rules that it's not this all or nothing extremism. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, experimenting. Cool. Well, Bobby Jean, it's just so fun to say. I'm sorry.
I'm never sad about it. I just love you so much, and I love our conversations.
Yeah. Well, I think next time you join me, well, I don't even know what topic we should hit next.
I
There's been so
I
many
have a
that you've
topic
mentioned.
idea.
Oh, you have one.
You're
Okay.
you're doing something very serious. I heard you're getting an implant.
Yeah, I'm getting the Eversense hopefully in a couple weeks. By the time this publishes, it should be a couple weeks out. So we definitely should talk about that. Hopefully, I'll have it in
Well,
and on my arm by then.
yes, I have questions because I know that you've tried different CGMs. If you're not following Ginger on Instagram, please do. Her account is so good, so funny, so educational, and so witty, and I just love it. But you talked about, your struggles with certain CGMs.
In my skin. Yeah. Wait, we can't even, we're going to get into this too
But
much.
anyways, I
Wait,
would like to talk
wait,
to you about
tell
that.
everybody where, well, I'll consider it. No. Okay.
Yes, I think I would like to know. I have so many questions.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
Find me right online. You could find me. I'm right on Instagram at BJ Garceau T1D. That's where I'm linked up right now. We're going to hopefully be adding things to YouTube and so forth. But right now, just check me on Instagram. We have more
Yeah.
fun there.
I will include Bobby Jean's Instagram handle in the show notes of this episode. Well,
Awesome. Well, I
thank
love you
you.
very
It's
much.
good to see you. I love you too. And yeah, I just think that it's a really cool story because anyone who would meet you today would be like, damn, that's a badass. And It's
And I was
we're
I
say
was such a wimp.
yeah. I mean, we're all the kind of product of what we choose to do, and you made a choice, and now you're basically a different person.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
very humbling, and
yeah.
so it's nice. There's an old saying: it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener at war.
Oh
Meaning, I don't know if you've ever heard that. It just means it's good
no.
to have a set of skills and be humble and
Yeah,
enjoy your life in the garden, but be ready in case you're needed. But if you just know how to garden, you're not going to
yeah.
be ready for war.
I
So that
know.
was just a
I
a
like it.
phrase that I just love.
Well, I have another quote that would relate to this whole conversation is we are what we repeatedly do.
I love that.
Right? All
I
right.
love.
Thank you. Love you.
I love
Good
you
night
too.
to
I'll talk to
you.
you soon. Bye.